Hey everyone, ready to dive into something big? We're tackling aging and why our time is limited.
Ooh, that's a heavy one, right?
Yeah, it's one of those questions that's been around forever, but we've got an amazing guide for this deep dive, a book called Why We Die by Nobel Laureate Venki Ramakrishnan.
Sounds intense.
It is, but it's written in such a clear and engaging way. I was particularly struck by this comparison he makes between the death of a single cell and the death of, like, a whole city.
Interesting.
Right. They're both these complex systems that eventually break down, and it just makes you realize death happens at all levels, from the microscopic to the massive.
So true.
And then this leads into a question that's just fascinating. Why do some species live so much longer than others?
Yeah, it's a head scratcher.
Yeah.
Like, nature's playing favorites with lifespans. What's the deal?
Right. What makes a bat live for decades while a mouse only gets a couple of years? What are those long-lived creatures doing right?
Well, to understand that, we got to unpack this idea of the immortal gene.
Mm.
It's this concept that our bodies are basically just vehicles for our genes. They help those genes get passed down through generations.
Okay, so the genes themselves are practically immortal.
Pretty much. They keep getting copied and passed on. But our bodies, what scientists call the soma, are unfortunately not so lucky.
Right, we age. We eventually die. But we make sure those genes keep going.
Exactly.
So it's like we're spaceships for these immortal genes just hurtling through time. It's kind of wild when you think about it like that. But then here's the big question. If the genes are immortal, why do we even have to die in the first place?
Ah, that's where things get really interesting. You see, death might actually be the price we pay for having sex.
Wait, what? How does that work?
Well, sexual reproduction, it's all about mixing genes, creating variation, right?
Sure, yeah.
Makes the species more adaptable. But it requires this distinction between parent and offspring.
Yeah.
And, well, that distinction means the parent eventually becomes obsolete.
Wow, talk about a sacrifice. So are those biologically immortal species, like Hydra or the immortal jellyfish, have they somehow figured out a way to bypass this whole death thing? They seem to defy aging as we know it.
They definitely challenge our understanding. I mean, think about it. They can regenerate entire body parts, sometimes even their whole bodies. It's like they have the cheat code for immortality.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
But whether we can unlock their secrets and apply them to humans, well, that's still a big mystery.
It would be incredible, wouldn't it? Imagine being able to regrow a limb. It's like something out of science fiction.
Totally. But, Ramakrishnan points out a really important thing. Even single-celled organisms, they age too, as long as there's a clear difference between the mother cell and the daughter cell.
So even at that tiny level, there's this concept of aging.
Yeah. Seems like aging is baked into the process of life itself, at least for most organisms.
That's pretty profound.
Right. And it leads to some intriguing theories about why we age. One idea that really grabbed my attention is the disposable soma theory.
Disposable soma. What's that all about?
Basically, it suggests our bodies invest more energy into reproduction than into keeping ourselves in tip-top shape, repairing and maintaining everything.
So from an evolutionary standpoint, making babies is more important than individual survival.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But then what about menopause? It seems to go against that whole idea. Why would women stop reproducing halfway through their lives? Doesn't seem very efficient for passing on those genes.
You're right. Menopause is kind of a head-scratcher for evolutionary biologists. There are some theories out there, though.
Huh.
One suggests that it allows older females to focus on helping raise their grandchildren.
So they're ensuring the survival of their genes through their descendants, like a grandmother effect.
Precisely.
Mhm.
Another idea is that it's a way to avoid competing with younger generations for resources.
That makes sense too. But it still doesn't explain why it's such a sudden change compared to the gradual decline in male fertility.
You've got a point there. Menopause is this fascinating puzzle that we're still trying to piece together. And it just highlights how much we still don't know about aging. Now, remember how we were talking about those long-lived species?
Yeah, like the bats and stuff.
There's a fascinating link between body size and lifespan. Generally speaking, bigger animals tend to live longer, but there are some awesome exceptions to this rule.
Right. The bats and naked mole rats, they live way longer than their size would suggest.
Exactly. Those are the rock stars of the animal kingdom. Scientists even have this thing called the longevity quotient. It compares an animal's actual lifespan to what you'd expect based on its size.
Cool. So where do humans fall on that scale?
Humans have a longevity quotient of about 5, meaning we live 5 times longer than you'd expect for our size. Pretty good, right? But the naked mole rats, they're the real champions.
They're amazing, aren't they? They're not only super long-lived, but they're also incredibly resistant to cancer. How do they pull that off?
Well, it seems their cells have this unique way of dealing with cancer-causing genes. Instead of going rogue and becoming cancerous, those cells basically self-destruct. It's like a built-in anti-cancer mechanism.
Oh, that's incredible. So they've got this internal system that prevents tumors from forming.
It's pretty remarkable. Scientists are studying like crazy, trying to figure out if we can learn anything from their cancer-fighting superpowers.
I can see why. It's like they hold a key to unlocking some major secrets about longevity. And speaking of longevity, Ramakrishnan also tells this great story about Jeanne Calment, the oldest person ever recorded. She lived to a whopping 122 years old.
Oh, wow. I've heard of her. Wasn't she a smoker, though?
She was. And get this, she ate 2 pounds of chocolate every week.
No way. 2 pounds. That's a lot of chocolate.
It is. Of course, we're not recommending smoking or going overboard on chocolate, but her case really highlights the fact that there's no single formula for a long life. It's this complex interplay of genetics, lifestyle choices, and probably a bit of luck too.
Yeah. Gotta have some luck on your side. But, we've been talking about this idea of the immortal gene and our bodies being these temporary vessels. What's actually happening at the cellular level that causes us to age?
Right. Let's get into the nitty-gritty details.
Okay, so picture this. Our cells are like these intricate cities, bustling with activity, constantly working to keep us alive. And the master controller of all this is our DNA.
Our DNA, the famous double helix.
You got it. It's like
Uh-huh.
this 3 billion letter code that governs every aspect of our biology. But here's the thing. This code is surprisingly vulnerable to damage.
Damage? Like what kind of damage are we talking about?
Think of it like typos in that 3 billion letter code. These typos are called mutations, and they can happen from errors during DNA replication or from exposure to things like radiation or certain chemicals.
So it's like our DNA is slowly accumulating these typos over time.
Exactly. And some of those typos, they're harmless or even beneficial. They drive evolution. But others, they can really mess with how our cells function, leading to aging and disease.
No wonder things start to go wrong as we get older. It's like a slow but steady decline in the quality of the code itself. But isn't there something about those, what are they called, telomeres?
You're on the right track. Telomeres, they're like these protective caps at the ends of our chromosomes.
Okay, so chromosomes, they're like those X-shaped structures that hold our DNA, right?
Exactly. And every time a cell divides, those telomeres get a little bit shorter. It's like, imagine making a copy of a train track. Each copy is slightly shorter than the original because you can't quite reach the very end.
Ah, I see. So those telomeres are kind of like a biological clock ticking away inside our cells. Is there any way to stop that clock, or at least like slow it down?
That's a question scientists are working hard to answer. But it's not just about telomeres. There's also this whole other layer of complexity called epigenetics.
Epigenetics, I've heard that term thrown around, but honestly, I'm not quite sure what it means.
Think of it like this. Epigenetics is like a control panel on top of our genes. It influences which genes are turned on or off.
So it's not just about the genes we inherit, but how those genes are expressed.
Exactly. And these epigenetic changes, they can be influenced by things like our environment, our diet, our lifestyle choices. It's like a cellular memory of our experiences.
Fascinating. So even though we're born with a certain set of genes, our experiences can actually change how those genes function.
That's the amazing thing about epigenetics. And these changes can accumulate over time, and they can definitely play a role in the aging process.
It's like our experiences are literally shaping our biology. It makes you think twice about those late-night pizza binges. But what are some of the practical implications of this epigenetic stuff? Like, how are scientists using this knowledge to understand aging?
Oh, there's some incredible discoveries happening. One that really blew my mind is something called the DNA methylation clock. By analyzing patterns of DNA methylation, scientists can actually predict your biological age.
No way. So they can look at your DNA and tell how old your cells really are.
Yep, pretty much. And they can even assess your risk of developing certain diseases based on these epigenetic markers. It's giving us incredible insights into how our life experiences shape our health and how we age.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. Okay, so we've got DNA damage, telomere shortening, and these epigenetic changes all playing a role in aging. But can you give us an example of how this damage actually shows up in the body?
Sure. Let's take Alzheimer's disease, a devastating condition linked to the accumulation of misfolded proteins in the brain. These misfolded proteins, they disrupt brain cell function, leading to memory loss and cognitive decline.
It's not just about cells dying off then, it's also about them malfunctioning because of these messed up proteins. That's scary stuff.
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling. And it's not just Alzheimer's. Many age-related diseases like Parkinson's and heart disease, they're linked to the buildup of these misfolded proteins.
So it seems like a key part of aging is our cells' ability to deal with this kind of cellular garbage, right? Like if they could just keep things tidy, maybe we could slow down the whole process.
You're hitting on a really important point. Our cells have several systems for cleaning out damaged proteins and other cellular debris. One of them is called autophagy, which is basically like the cell's recycling and waste disposal system.
Ah, so it's like a little cellular cleaning crew.
Exactly. It breaks down and recycles all these unwanted components, keeps things running smoothly. But as we age, this system, it gets a little less efficient, allows harmful stuff to build up.
Like our cells get clogged up with junk. Yuck. But is there any way to give those cellular cleaning crews a boost?
That's one of the big questions researchers are exploring. Now, this brings us to a pretty fascinating story about prions. There are these misfolded proteins that can actually spread like infections. They were first discovered through the study of kuru, a fatal brain disease that was found in Papua New Guinea.
Oh, I remember reading about kuru. It was spread through that ritualistic practice of eating the brains of deceased relatives, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was a pretty shocking discovery that really highlighted the infectious nature of prions. And what's even more remarkable is that these prions, they can actually corrupt normal proteins, forcing them to misfold as well.
So it's like one bad apple that can spoil the whole bunch.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So prions are these tiny little protein villains wreaking havoc in the brain.
I like that analogy. And while prion diseases themselves are relatively rare, they've given us valuable insights into other neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Both involve the buildup of these abnormal proteins that disrupt brain function.
It's incredible how much we've learned about the cellular mechanisms of aging in recent years. But I have to admit, it is a lot to wrap my head around.
It definitely is. And we've only scratched the surface. Now get ready for this one. One of the most fascinating parts of the cell are the mitochondria, those tiny powerhouses that fuel our bodies.
Oh yeah, mitochondria. I remember learning about them way back in high school biology. They're the energy factories of the cell, right? But how do they fit into this whole aging puzzle?
Their story is absolutely incredible, and it goes way back.
Hmm.
So mitochondria have their own DNA, separate from the DNA in our cell's nucleus. And get this, they actually evolved from bacteria that were engulfed by our ancient ancestors billions of years ago.
What, there were like little stowaways that became essential to our survival.
Exactly. And mitochondria are responsible for producing ATP, the energy currency of the cell, through this process called cellular respiration. We wouldn't be able to function without them.
Wow, so we're literally powered by these ancient bacteria. It's just mind-blowing. But you said there's a downside to this whole symbiotic relationship.
Right. As amazing as they are, mitochondria are also a major source of damage that contributes to aging. It's like a trade-off for all that energy they produce.
How so? Do they wear out over time or what?
It's a little more complicated than that. During cellular respiration, mitochondria also produce these things called free radicals. They're highly reactive molecules that can damage DNA, proteins, and other cellular components.
So they're both essential for life and a source of damage that leads to aging. That's tough.
Yeah. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. And that's why there was so much hype around antioxidants, those substances that neutralize free radicals, as the key to slowing down aging. Unfortunately, just popping antioxidant pills hasn't quite lived up to the hype. The biology of aging is far more complex than that.
Yeah, I remember that whole antioxidant craze a few years back. Like you said, no quick fixes when it comes to aging. But understanding how mitochondria contribute is a huge step, right?
Absolutely. It's giving us a much clearer picture of how our cells age and how we might be able to intervene. But remember, it's not just about mitochondria or any single factor. Aging is like this incredibly complex symphony of interconnected processes happening at the molecular, cellular, and tissue level.
It sounds like we've got our work cut out for us if we're going to crack this aging code. But it's fascinating stuff, and I'm eager to learn more about what researchers are doing to slow down this whole process, or maybe even reverse some of its effects.
Well, buckle up, because we're just getting started. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring the amazing world of regeneration and the potential of stem cells to combat aging. And we'll even delve into some of those futuristic ideas like cryonics and the quest for immortality.
Sounds like we're in for a wild ride. Stay tuned, everyone, because this deep dive is about to get even deeper.
So you know how people say the human body replaces itself every 7 years?
Yeah, I've heard that too. Is it true, though, it doesn't feel like I'm brand new every 7 years?
Uh-huh. Well, no, not exactly. Turns out different tissues regenerate at totally different rates.
Ah, that makes more sense.
Yeah, like your skin cells, for example, they're renewing themselves all the time. That's how cuts and scrapes heal so fast.
Makes sense. And blood cells too, right? They're always getting replaced.
Yep, every few weeks.
It's like this constant cellular refresh.
Right. But not every tissue is that quick to bounce back.
I figured. What about, like, the heart?
Heart muscle is slower.
Yeah.
And especially brain cells, they regenerate much more slowly.
Makes sense why strokes and Alzheimer's and things like that are so devastating. The damage is often permanent.
Exactly. The slow regeneration, especially as we age, highlights a key limitation of our body's self-repair systems.
Hmm.
It's like we have a biological warranty period, and after a while, those repairs just aren't as effective.
Ooh, I like that. A biological warranty. So, how do stem cells fit into all of this?
Stem cells are fascinating, aren't they? They have the potential to develop into pretty much any cell type.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
Like blank slates?
Yeah, they're capable of becoming any specialized cell we need.
So they're like the ultimate repair crew, ready to transform into whatever's needed.
That's a good way to think about it. They're key for tissue regeneration throughout our lives,
Hmm.
but unfortunately, as we age, their numbers dwindle and they don't function as well.
Oh, so it's not just the cells getting damaged, but our ability to replenish them gets worse too.
Exactly. That's why stem cell therapy is so exciting.
I can see why. Have you heard about those parabiosis experiments, where they connect the circulatory systems of young and old mice?
Oh, yeah. Those fountain of youth experiments.
What have they found?
Some pretty wild stuff. Young blood actually seems to rejuvenate older mice.
Like reverse aging?
In a way, yeah. They've seen improvements in muscle function, cognitive abilities, even lifespan. And then the really weird part,
What's that?
old blood seems to do the opposite.
You're kidding. Like it makes young mice age faster.
Yeah. It's like this tug of war between youth and age happening right there in their blood.
Crazy. Do they know what causes it?
They're working on it. There's a lot of focus on something called senescent cells.
Senescent cells, what are those?
Imagine them as zombie cells. They've stopped dividing, but they haven't died off.
So they're just hanging around.
Yeah, but they're not harmless. They secrete harmful substances, cause inflammation, and damage tissue.
They're like little troublemakers.
Yeah. And we get more of them as we age. But here's the good news.
There's good news.
Scientists are developing drugs called senolytics that can eliminate those cells.
Whoa, like zombie hunters for our bodies.
Exactly. Early studies have shown they actually improve health and lifespan in mice, and there are human trials starting too.
Wow, that's incredible. So what about those more drastic approaches like cryonics?
Ah, cryonics. The ultimate bet on immortality.
It does seem like something out of sci-fi.
It really does.
Yeah.
Preserve your body or brain at super low temperatures, then get revived in the future when they have the tech to fix whatever ailed you.
Sounds pretty far out there. Are there any ethical concerns?
Tons. First off, we have no idea if it even works. Can you actually preserve the brain's structures well enough for revival?
Yeah, and would you even be the same person?
Exactly. And what kind of world would you be waking up to? Would there even be a place for you after being gone for so long?
Those are big questions, and I bet cryonics is super expensive too.
Oh, absolutely. Only for the ultra-wealthy right now, which raises some ethical questions too.
It does. So it's a very complex issue. Are there other approaches being explored, ones that are, more grounded in reality?
Absolutely. There's a ton of research happening right now.
What are some of the promising avenues?
Well, there's gene editing, manipulating metabolic pathways, even drugs that mimic the effects of caloric restriction. It's a very active field.
It sounds like there's a lot of potential there.
There is. But we also need to be cautious about the hype. Aging is incredibly complex, and there's no magic bullet solution.
Right. But it's okay to be hopeful too, right? That we'll make some real progress.
Absolutely. It's all about finding that balance between optimism and healthy skepticism. Support the research, but don't believe every headline you read.
Be critical thinkers.
Exactly. We need to be able to evaluate the evidence and understand the limitations of science.
So where do we go from here? We've learned so much about aging and all these different approaches to combating it, from the cellular level to those big philosophical questions.
It's been an incredible journey so far, hasn't it?
It really has, but now I'm wondering, what if we actually could extend our lifespans significantly? Should we even try? What would that mean for society, for us as individuals?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it? And it's one we'll be grappling with in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so now we're getting into the really big questions, like what if we could actually push human lifespan way further? Should we even be trying to do that?
It's a question that goes way beyond science.
Yeah,
It becomes an issue for all of society.
I can see that. I mean, just imagine the implications. People living longer, working longer. Would we need to completely restructure society? What would it mean for families? For relationships? It's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, and it's interesting how Ramakrishnan contrasts this futuristic vision with his own very human experience visiting those Egyptian mummies at the British Museum.
Yeah.
It's almost like a reality check.
Mm.
Even with all our efforts to prolong life, we're still going to face our mortality someday.
It's almost like those mummies bring us back down to earth, you know? They were real people who lived and breathed thousands of years ago. Makes you think about what we leave behind, what our legacy will be.
It definitely does. And it taps into that very human desire to be remembered, for our lives to have meaning.
Which, in a way, is part of what drives this whole quest for immortality, right? But then you have to wonder, if we could actually live forever, would it somehow diminish the meaning of life? Or would it make it even more meaningful?
It's such a deep question. And Ramakrishnan doesn't shy away from the ethical challenges that come with these ideas. He even mentions this group of leading gerontologists who basically said, hold on a second.
Oh, really? What did they say?
Well, they argued that even if we could eliminate every single age-related death, it wouldn't actually add that many years to the average human lifespan.
So there's a limit to how far we can push it, at least with what we know now.
Seems that way. But let's say we can't achieve immortality. What about the quality of those extra years? That's where this idea of compressing morbidity comes in.
Compressing morbidity, that's a new one. What does that mean?
It's the idea that we could squeeze all those unhealthy years, the years filled with chronic illness and decline, into a much shorter period at the very end of life. So we're not just living longer, we're living healthier for longer.
So instead of adding years of frailty, we're adding years of vitality. That sounds pretty ideal, but is it actually achievable?
There's a lot of debate about that. Some scientists, like Thomas Perls, they believe there's a hard limit to human lifespan, somewhere around 120 years.
Oh, really? So they think we're already pushing up against that ceiling.
Yeah. But then you have other scientists like Stephen Ostad who are much more optimistic. They think we can blow past those limits with the right interventions.
It's fascinating how much disagreement there is, even among the experts. It just shows how much we still don't understand about the fundamental biology of aging.
Absolutely. But as we keep making new discoveries, we're going to have to face more and more ethical dilemmas. Like, if we develop these amazing therapies to slow down aging, who's going to have access to them? Will they only be available to the wealthy?
That's a really important point. We've already seen how social and economic inequality can impact health and lifespan. And then there's the even bigger question. How do we even define aging? Is it a natural part of life or a disease that we should try to cure?
That's a really profound question. And as we make progress in aging research, it's one we're going to have to answer as a society.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. It's incredible how far we've come in understanding the intricacies of aging, and it feels like we're on the brink of some truly groundbreaking discoveries.
It really is an exciting time to be studying aging. We may not have all the answers yet, but the potential to improve human health and well-being is a powerful motivator.
And as we wrap up today, I'm left with this sense of wonder and a renewed appreciation for just how complex and precious life is.
And maybe even a greater awareness of the things we can do right now to support healthy aging, regardless of what the future holds.
So to all our listeners out there, we leave you with one final thought. If we could significantly extend human lifespan, would you want to? What would it mean for you? For your loved ones? For how you find meaning in your own life? It's a question worth pondering.
It really is. Because when you get down to it, trying to understand aging is really about trying to understand what it means to be human.